All right, welcome, folks. Welcome to our first edition of an album ranking in quite some time here. We've been doing a lot of other things, but today we are going to bring in our special guest who's going to help us do that one, Mr. Kiebzak. Welcome.
How you doing? Nice to see you. Nice to see you guys.
All right, so yes, we are going through the 15 album catalog of none other than W.A.S.P today. With Blackie out on the road right now, right in the middle of his tour, what a better time to bring to light and dig into these albums here.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's dig in on W.A.S.P. What's your take? How did you first become associated with knowing W.A.S.P here?
So around 10 or 11 years old, I would scour every thrift store and every store in the mall for cassettes or CDs of bands that I either already loved or and was getting into more, or that I knew that I was going to like based on the cover. And I was in a Goodwill, and they had two Kiss cassettes. It was the Forever single and Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits. And I had already had Smashes, but I picked them up because they were like 50 cents or whatever. And next to it was W.A.S.P, who I've heard the name through VH1 and stuff at that time, but I was like, oh, W.A.S.P, and it was inside of the Electric Circus, and I picked it up and put it in and never turned back. Was able to work the show and see them in 2005, which was incredible. Um, and yeah, just been a pretty much a diehard W.A.S.P fan since I was, 12, 13 years old. So definitely fell in the category of shock rock for me, and picked right up where Kiss and Alice Cooper started at the time, getting not boring, but it's all I listened to. So throwing another band in the mix was cool, and that's when Twisted Sister and Queensryche and all these other bands started coming into my sight line. So W.A.S.P played a very important role in me as a musician and me as a music fan growing up. So um, definitely a highlight band for me out of all the bands I love, and looking forward. It was really fun to go through these records because when a band has 15 albums, it's sort of hard to remember what some of them sound like and stuff. So going through this, it was interesting to be able to really rank them and put them where they're supposed to be in my fandom, I guess.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it was this W.A.S.P. They came out 1984. That was the debut, and at that point, we didn't have um, they would play them like on 97 Rock like overnight, late night on the weekends, when they did the metal show, stuff like that. But
Right.
they wouldn't put them in regular rotation on the air, so never really got to hear them too much. And then 97 Rock folded up, changed their format. So then the only way we can listen to certain bands where we had to go listen to some of the Canadian stations. And I remember in particular, I got this new radio one Christmas, and it picked up the Toronto stations pretty nicely. So I was able to listen to that, and sure enough, that's where I first heard my first Wasp song, none other than "I Want to Be Somebody," and that was I needed to hear. Man, what a great song, and it got me hooked on these guys at least for a little while here. I will say I did seem to lose interest in the band as they started getting a little, they changed. First couple albums were pretty much all in the same vein as we will see as we discuss. Then they started changing their format and everything, which at the time you don't like that. You don't appreciate it. You're used to hearing the harder, fast, the good radio friendly sing along type songs, and then you get stuff like the Crimson Idol and Headless Children. But now that you look back on it, you go, wow, these albums are phenomenal. Blackie had to grow as an artist, and that's exactly what he did.
Right.
So, without further ado, we're going to start ranking them, and we're going to get into them right now. We're going to start off with what you would call your number 15 there.
All right, so number 15. Now, normally in what you just said about Wasp sort of straying from their original path. Yes, especially the first two albums, they were very in that harder rock range and what it eventually became. But I feel through the albums, it still had that W.A.S.P feel. The one album that I feel did not, besides one or two small songs, is the very, very weird KFD Kill Fuck Die. I tried to give it multiple more listens to see if I was missing something. It's just so dry and so poorly produced, and it sounds like Trent Reznor had a really bad day, and it's just really it's sort of eye-opening because a lot of bands, and we hit on this on like the Firehouse thing and the Kiss thing, and Alice Cooper, that when a band tries to go outside of their genre, it sometimes works. And for me, I love variety. So if a band goes a weird way and it works, great. This did not happen. What's even more bizarre is Chris Holmes was in the band at this point. And the album just falls completely flat. It's almost like you would think the other albums without Holmes would sort of be like this, but this album's the weirdest one out of the bunch. Um, I'm into industrial. I like industrial bands, and I just don't. I mean, this isn't even like a Kiss Carnival of Souls thing. I mean, this is bad. This is like Blackie lost his way. So KFD right at the bottom for number 15 for me, for sure.
Okay. So my number 15, I'm going in a little bit different of a direction, but a different direction nonetheless. So I've got none other than the Neon God Part 2, The Demise, and then
Wow.
I call that the demise of Wasp right there, man. The Neon Gods segment did not do any favors for me. Not a fan of this album at all. Looking back on I don't know why he took so much time to do, a part one and a part two. Maybe it would have been a little bit better if he pared it down to just one album or just released it as a double album at the time. But to do separate albums, I think he lost a lot of people around this time. He was on Sanctuary Records at this point, so he wasn't really on a major label anymore. And this album features Daryl Roberts on the guitar. So obviously, by this point, Chris Holmes is gone. They still have Mike Duda on bass and Stet Howland on drums at this point. Um, I don't know. I just couldn't get into any of these songs on this album whatsoever. It's definitely the weakest one. Nothing stood out for me, and that's just my take on it. But I just that's what I got at number 15, The Neon God Part 2, The Demise.
Interesting. All right. Um, well, for my number 14, I have the 2009 album that I was very excited for when it came out because I did like the output right before. But Babylon did really nothing for me. You talk about this is the one album besides KFD, and there's one more that we'll talk about when we get there, that really they seem to go away from the melodic darkness that is W.A.S.P, even through beautiful music and slower songs. And it's almost like, and again, it's almost like a failed attempt to try to sound like Deep Purple kind of rock. And I mean, they cover what song do they
Burn.
cover then? Burn. Yeah, they cover Burn. A good song, but it's like, I mean, honestly, the whole record sounds like a Deep Purple ripoff to me. Um, there again, I mean, I really do like the musicians on this record. Doug Blair is great. And Mike Duda, was able to meet him in 2005 at Infinity, and he was a nice guy. I just seen him play over the summer with Dizzy Reed. And yeah, he's a great bass player, a lot of energy, spins around like he's half his age. Um, so again, I thought the record was going to be good, but just not a huge fan of it at all. I think Babylon Burning is a good song and Into the Fire is a good song, and they're back to back on the record. But beyond that, I don't find myself re-listening to this album much. So that's why number 14 for me is recent album, and that's Babylon.
Okay, my number 14, we're going to go back to the year. Oh, let's see, where do we go back to for this one? Oh, 1999. Going back to Eldorado. Number 14 for me. Yeah, this album, I would say Eldorado and Damnation Angels are the two songs for me that really stand out the most. really decent songs, but the rest of the album, Cocaine Cowboys, Dirty Balls has to be one of the worst Wasp songs I've ever. Not only in
Yeah,
title, but just everything about it. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought that I thought that when I was revisiting that song. I'm like, it's not just the title, the whole song is trash. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Worst song he ever wrote by a mile, unfortunately. And believe it or not, most of these albums are, I would say, you know how they always say, "Oh, this band never really made a really bad album."
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately for me, I'm still not at the point where I would consider one of the albums deep fair, even. I don't call
Right.
Eldorado fair. I don't call Neon God Part 2 fair, but I'll let you know when I get to that point. So
Right.
for number 14, Eldorado.
I mean, for a band with 15 records, I mean, that's not terrible, to
Yeah.
have two, three, or four that don't stand up to par with the rest. Like, I think that's fair. So, but totally, I get what you're saying. So that's your number 14. So my number 13, we're gonna go to 2 years before Kill Fuck Die, and it was the album released directly before it, and that's Still Not Black Enough. Now, this is where the records start getting like 50-50 to me. Um, so with my 15 and 14 choices, there's like one, maybe two or two and a half decent songs on there. Now we're getting to the point where for me, it's 50-50. Still Not Black Enough. You can tell he was going in the direction of grunge or industrial, but it still had that Wasp feel. There are some standouts there. Scared to Death is probably one of my favorite Wasp songs from a non-popular album. And then honestly, as much as I'm not a fan of Wasp's covers, the one cover that actually works for me is Somebody to Love. I think it's great for its voice. I think it's upbeat more than the original, which I enjoy. So that album has some good stuff. And again, that's where I realized, okay, now from this point up, the albums at least have 3 to 5 good songs. And then obviously it'll go up from there and there as the albums get higher on my list. But my number 13, Still Not Black Enough.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm surprised that one's that low on yours because it's
Really?
got a way to go on mine. But my number 13 is one that you've already mentioned, so we're in the same ballpark there, and that's going to
Yeah,
be
I
the
knew this one we were going to be a little bit different than the most with our choices here. There's so much.
so to 1997, Kill Fuck Die, number 13. Definitely
Wow. Okay.
horrible, horrible album. I mean, My Tortured Eyes is probably the best song on the album by a mile, and there's nothing else that even comes close to it in my estimation. I don't know, it's just total difference of Wasp. It just doesn't sound like Wasp. It's just not Wasp in my estimation, I don't know, I just couldn't get into it. I even tried listening to it again. When it first came out, I thought when I first got it, because I got it right when it came out, I said, man, this is heavy. This is real heavy. You're thinking, oh boy. But then, nothing really caught me. Nothing made me want to go back and revisit the album really. And that's why it's where it's ranked. It's just if I'm going to listen to something by Wasp, I'm going to listen to something that I like. I'm not going to listen to this garbage. So, that's where I've got number 13. So we're still not at my area of fair yet. So I'll let you know when I get there.
Yeah, now, and it's weird when we do these because I put so much time into to ranking these, which is what I thought was my truth. But it really depends on the day. Like now that I'm looking at it, this could have been swapped with Still Not Black Enough. But my next choice, and now we're sort of like in the same ballpark here to the list. We are gonna have two close together, and that's Hell Dorado from '99, which you already mentioned. The only thing I disagreed with you on is Cocaine Cowboy. To me, I think the title sort of does it a disservice, but that's classic Wasp on an album that really doesn't scream classic Wasp. Um, and I don't hate it. I mean, you could tell Chris Holmes is on guitar, much unlike KFD. So I mean, having Chris back helped. And again, Cocaine Cowboys, I feel that stands up to anything on the first record as far as feel. I'm not saying song quality, I'm saying feel that could have worked on the first three albums. So to me, that's why this one was a little bit above the pack over Still Not Black Enough because it definitely has the Chris Holmes feel on guitar. I just don't feel the song qualities are up to snuff that much, but Cocaine Cowboys definitely classic Wasp sounding to me. So yeah, right there. And now, at least for me, we're getting into good to great categories here with the albums moving upwards. So, but yeah, that's where we are. Eldorado at number 12.
Okay, my number 12 is going to be the counterpart to my number 15, and that's going to be the Neon God Part 1, The
Mm,
Rise. Um, it's weird that Frankie Banali drums on this album, but on the second part, it's Stet Howland.
yeah.
It's just weird how I think Stet does play on one track on here, but it's just weird how he changed drummers in the middle of this whole thing. You figure they were really, I guess they didn't record them around the same exact time.
Yeah, to my knowledge, they were recorded in different parts of the year, which must have been, I think they started in 2002.
Oh wow.
If I'm not mistaken, that's what I remember reading and hearing through the years. But yeah, I'm honestly surprised these albums are that low on your list, but we'll get there when we get there.
Well,
So
something's got to be.
yeah, yeah.
But getting back to the Neon God Part 1, The Rise is cool. Asylum number 9. Raging Storm is a great way to close out the album. I will say that. He did that
Right.
properly. I think these concept albums to me, a concept album is either going to work or it's not going to work. And to me, unfortunately, these ones just don't work. Obviously, we know he's a big Who fan, so he was trying to go in the way of like a Tommy type album or, stuff like that, Quadrophenia. But it just, yeah, he just didn't. This album doesn't do it. Now, he does have another album that we're going to be talking about that does make the grade and did really well, and it was a great concept. But Neon God, too much. You can't do it on two albums, two lengthy albums at that. He was better off just trying to combine it and just into one. I feel he made a big mistake when it came to this. I just don't like either album, and sadly, I'm still at that point where I could do without these albums really. So
Wow.
that's
Okay.
my number 12.
I gotcha. So my number 11 is going to 2007. This is an album I didn't have so much hope for, but really loved it, and that's why I wish that Babylon was better than it was. But Dominator, really, again, um, two more covers and actually Burns on here too, which is very weird, but Burn is on both those records. But and then Fortunate Son, which I sort of dig the cover, but Dominator had a few good when I remember when first listening to it, I mean Mercy, Long Long Way to Go, and Take Me Up, amazing four songs. And I thought it was gonna drop after that, and then Burning Man happens, and that's one of my favorite, probably in the Wasp catalog. So and then once you get down to Heaven's Hung in Black, really cool, like marching, story, almost poem-esque. So yeah, really good album to be sitting there in the later end of their catalog. Didn't expect it to hold up like it does when listening to it for this, and really dig it. I like the album cover. So yeah, 2007 Dominator is my number 11.
Yeah, my number 11 is Dominator.
Oh, really? Finally.
We
Cool. All
match.
right, we match.
But I disagree on most of that stuff that you said. Another album that I could do without. Probably won't go back and listen to it much. I like Take Me Up. Heaven's Hung in Black is really cool. I just really didn't like the rest of the album. I tried to like Mercy because usually that first Wasp song on an album is usually a barn burner to get the album going and find style, but not in this particular case. I just couldn't really get into it. But I will say that it's obviously you got Doug Blair on lead guitar here. But he doesn't. it's not his playing that's the problem with these albums. Let's put that right on the forefront. I think he's a great player. Um, but it just for me, it just the songs just aren't W.A.S.P songs really, except for Heaven's Hung in Black. I mean, he liked that one that much that he even did a reprise on it, which
Yeah,
almost feels like he did it just to add some space to the album because he didn't have enough material or something. I don't know, because it's not really a concept like his other
right.
stuff. So why would you have a reprise on here? But anyhow, that's where I got it. Same spot as you did. We both agree it is number 11 out of the
Yep.
rest of the catalog, and I'm still not quite to that point yet. So go ahead.
Yeah. So number 10 for me is one that should have been great, has probably my number three favorite W.A.S.P song on it, but the rest of the album is just shit. And obviously they broke up after this and for what, a year or two. But Headless Children just never hit home for me besides Rebel in the FDG, I think, is one of the best songs that they've ever released. Um, I just don't, there's really not anything. Forever Free is decent. I know they're playing that on this leg of the tour. Um, I'm just not a huge fan of anything on this record besides the last song, Rebel in the FDG, I think is classic, classic top five W.A.S.P song for sure. Just great. Wish the rest of the record sounded like that, but I know a lot of people, say that this is the drop off, and I listened to it multiple times more than the rest of them to try to see if I was missing something, and I'm not. So, yeah, just not a huge fan of it, and that's why it's right there at number 10, very much on the lower end of the good albums. But that's
All right.
because Rumble in the FTG.
My number 10 is going to be none other than the 2009 release Babylon.
Okay.
The another Doug Blair related album here. Um, Starts off in pretty good style with Crazy, your typical Wasp song. But yeah, I know you had mentioned this one already. Burn, um, it's an okay cover. I think it's kind of hard to do better than David Coverdale. Let's be honest here. You
Yeah,
know, you're not
definitely.
going to beat Coverdale no matter what you try to do. But the music sounds all right. I mean, but I don't know. I just think I don't like it when Blackie does these covers, to tell you the truth. He managed to go through a couple albums without a cover. I think one of the first two. And then he kind of did a cover song almost every album. Every couple albums, he would do a cover song out of nowhere, which is strange, but
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, it'd be cool. It'd be one thing if he actually just did the covers as like a single, like
Right.
on a B side or something like that of a single release, as opposed to actually putting the cover right on the album.
Right.
Um, because it's just weird. Usually, you always picture the way he wrote a lot of these songs, especially later on, once he got through the first couple albums, he was doing a whole different thing about writing. So why he included so many covers even later on in his career really didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Right.
If you
Same
wanted
here.
if you wanted to make a covers album, just make a goddamn covers album and be done with it. There's no
Yeah.
need reason to put these songs on any of these other albums. Yeah, you notice how he didn't put any covers on any of his concept albums because if he was going to do something like that and he wanted to put a cover on to tie in with a theme or something, that's a little different. But he didn't do that. So
Right.
you got me. But anyhow, so that's where I have Babylon at number 10. And yep, that's where I will say Into the Fire I like. That's another good song that you had mentioned too. So I will say that that
Yeah.
is a highlight of the album. Probably the highlight of the album, right? Probably more than likely. But
Yeah, for sure.
and that was 2009's Babylon for number 10.
Yep. All right. So we're gonna go 8 years before that, and this would be the last album with Chris Holmes. And that is Unholy Terror from 2001. Um, Honestly, some decent songs. This is where it was sort of hard for me for like the next five to really put in order here because this is where I really dig the songs. Now, my thing with Wasp is they're a band that, and I really can't think of many other like this, where their sound really hasn't completely changed. It's the melodic, almost to the point where some of these songs start sounding very similar, right? So it's hard to really pull them apart sometimes. But this album is where here and up is where I feel like there's some difference that makes the albums individual on their own. And I love songs like Ravenheart and Unholy Terror and Who Slayed Baby Jane are probably my favorite three on the record. Let It Roar Into Hate to Love Me is a really cool one-two punch to start the record too. Again, you can really tell it's Holmes on guitar, which is what I love about listening to this record. Mike Duda was still in full force with the band. Sort of early on in his tenure, but I mean, he's been with them for so long now. So, yeah, that's why number nine for me is Unholy Terror from 2001. What do you got?
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I got the same
Oh,
unholy,
really? Cool. There you go.
unholy
Two.
terror. Yeah,
All right.
I wasn't reading my thing right, but that's exactly what I got at number nine here.
Cool.
Um, yeah. So I Let It Roar. Is there a better opening album song in the catalog? At least the later part of the catalog. I would say that's the song that one of the later catalogs. What a way to start off an album, just
Yeah.
let it roar, baby, let it roar. And did they ever?
Yep.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's why I said this is where they start getting a little bit better for me. Locomotive Man, I like Evermore. Who Slayed Baby Jane? A couple of these songs really a little different in a way from the Wasp way here a little bit. Some of these songs, especially with the titles and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely got a good feel to it. It's got at least this one's got really a few good songs that you can mention about. Unlike some of the other ones where I'm only mentioning like one or two tracks, this one has about four
Right.
or five on here that I could actually say, hey, we're talking. It's really starting to become a cool album, and I haven't really mentioned sales charts yet because basically none of these albums have sold,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
so that's one of the reasons why you're not hearing much of that stuff. None of them charted, and yeah, probably they deservingly so. Some of these albums on here just weren't strong enough to chart. It's a shame because out of the four albums that charted, his highest his the one that charted the worst out of the four is actually the best. So go figure. Charts were
Right.
different back then though compared to what they are now. So
Yeah.
but anyhow, yeah, 2000 and that was 2001. Unholy Terror is my number nine as well. So that's two of them we got right on this exact spot here.
Yeah, I know. Weird. Didn't expect that. Well, the next one, for my number eight is going to be a 2009's Golgotha. So, really, I dig this one better than, or I'm sorry, 2015. What am I talking about? It was the last record they put out. And I like it a lot better than El Dorado, obviously, a lot better than Still Not Black Enough. I think the songs opening with Scream is amazing. Slaves of the New World Order is one of my favorite Wasp songs. I didn't expect it to get that good at near the end of the record like that. But then the title track, Golgotha, closing the record, it's a little longer at just under 8 minutes. But good way to close a record and very Wasp-like, very epic track. Was very happy to hear a record, especially when I just re-listened to it in its entirety at once. I realized how good of a record that is for so late in their catalog. So Golgotha, it's going to be right there at number eight. And again, getting into the really great records now. So
All right, my number eight, and we're going to go back to the year 1992. At this point, grunge has really started to put his ugly head into the music scene here. But and I think that that did have an effect on this album because it seemed to have charted everywhere except in the U.S. But that I always thought maybe it was because of it was a concept album, and that's none other than the Crimson Idol here. That's my number eight. Um, a good attempt at a concept, and but the standout track, obviously, to me, is "Hold On to My Heart." I know that's been on all of his greatest hits compilations, and just a great song. I mean, who you always pictured Wasp back in the day as Love Machine and hard, fast animal and I want to be somebody. Really hard, fast paced songs. But then here comes Blackie with this amazing ballad that, even for people who hate ballads can say that this is just a great, great song. I mean, it didn't really expect to see it coming. You probably saw a little bit of a taste when he had did Forever Free, and then to come out with Hold On to My Heart on this next album was just amazing. And then the song "The Idol" is another one that stands out for me here. You got Chainsaw Charlie. So a lot of stuff on this album, and it's a concept, but I think it didn't really land at number eight for me because of the fact the number of songs or the quality. I just think the overall concept helped put it in perspective for me, and that's why I've got it ranked where I've got it ranked. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, it's not Tommy, but for a heavy metal guy like Blackie Lawless, his first attempt at a real concept album, I think it delivers. Delivered a decent album, very decent album, and that's why I've got number eight, Crimson Idol.
Cool. All right. Well, my number seven, this is where we differ greatly. The Neon God Part Two, The Demise. Or I'm sorry, my number seven is the Neon God Part One, The Rise. That's what I thought. The
See, it even
Rise.
mixes you up by having two
Yeah, it
parts.
does. But again, I both albums sound very close to each other. I mean, obviously it's just a continuation, but I really, really, really dig the songs much more than I did when it originally came out. But Sister Sadie and XTC Riders, I think, are the best songs on the record. I really dig it. I like the sound. I like the darkness. I remember my Metal Edge and Hit Parader magazines having ads for the record, and I finally found it at a media play and bought them both. And yeah, I really dug it then. And then it sort of was like, okay, it's sort of just sounding the same. And I sort of gave the record a rest. And then when I was re-listening for this, I realized how why I loved it in the first place. So number seven for me, Neon God Part One, The Rise, and yeah, that goes to show we're pretty much on different ends of the spectrum there with that. So
All right, and I don't think you mentioned my number seven yet. I don't think you did, but we're going back to 1986, believe it or not. And that's
yeah,
Inside the Electric Circus for my number
wow,
seven.
wow,
Yeah, I mean, this is where Wasp really started to lose a lot. There really wasn't a lot of songs on this album that stood out as much as per se the first two albums. You could definitely, out of the first three albums, you definitely knew that unfortunately they didn't get it up to the same level as the other two albums, unfortunately. That's just, sometimes that happens in the business. Not to say it's bad because it did make number seven. So it's not a bad album. It's just not as good as those first two. But then again, what is? You know?
yeah.
So, Inside the Electric Circus kicks off with the big welcome and kicks right into the Inside the Electric Circus title cut. Great way to start the album. Not a big fan of the cover. I don't need no doctor. I know it's one of the ones that Blackie gets a lot of good reviews on. I just not really a fan of the song itself.
I feel the
Although I
same.
thought he did a good job. I mean, out of all the versions, I'd rather listen to his version than anybody else's version. I just never really got into the song itself though. Um, I would say deep cut guilty pleasure song is Sweet Cheetah. I always liked that song. That one stood out for me. That was always one of my favorites on this album. Of course, Easy Living and that one, I think he did a really good job on that song. That's obviously another cover there. The good old Uriah Heep cover there. Easy living, but he did a good job on that one. You know, but to have two covers on the album and it's only your third album in, I think that was not really a good move in my estimation.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's hard to say. This album, it has its good points and it has its bad points, but overall, it's more good than bad. How's that sound?
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
So, so that's what I got. Number seven, Inside the Electric Circus.
All right. So my number six is going to be the album that came after my number seven, and that's the Neon God Part Two. Again, I look at this as like the same record, um, and they're both very strong for me, honestly. I mean, this one has Resurrector. And Clockwork Mary, I think, are the two like real strong standouts. But I love the melodicness. I love not being a huge ballad guy. I love how these albums sort of have slow songs that turn heavy. I really dig that because it's not a ballad for so long. So that's why these albums sort of stand up there for me because you can have the little like epic melodic slow stuff going on and then it sort of goes into fast wasp mode, which is still melodic. So yeah, that's why that's right there at number six for me. Yeah, part two.
All right. And my number six, we're going back to the year 1995. We're still not black enough.
Oh wow,
Um,
that's high.
yeah, yeah. Well, it has some really good songs in here that I liked. I like the first track, the title cut kicked right in. I also like his version of Somebody to Love. He did an okay job on that one,
Yeah.
definitely. It seems like to me though, the songs that really stand out to me are the ones near the end of the album. Keep Holding On
Mm.
and Breathe. Breathe is phenomenal. Probably definitely the best song on the album in my estimation. I Can't follows up with that. Yeah, I mean, this album probably was the last good album for a while for W.A.S.P. because you got to remember from 95 and then Unholy Terror would probably be the next one because he had the two clunkers with KFD and El Dorado afterwards. So it was good that, he was still in the 90s, but it's weird. They only released four albums in the 90s. And yeah, it's weird because it felt like Wasp was creating the whole time. It never seemed like they went away in the 90s, yet they only ended up releasing four albums, but that's about the time, you know, it's weird, ain't it? How back in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s, bands would make albums every year.
Oh
Every
yeah.
year they would come out with an album, and then all of a sudden, towards the late 80s, a lot of these bands, it took them longer, a year and a half, two, sometimes three,
Yeah, I
and
mean, well, that was sort of a typical thing. Like even in the 70s, I mean, Kiss was releasing an album a year, sometimes two here and there, you
sometimes
know what I
two. Yep.
mean? And Alice Cooper was doing the same thing. So yeah. I mean, I think every band in the 90s you've seen a real drop off, even with bands like Kiss and stuff to a lesser degree. But yeah, bands like Wasp, any of the glam and hair bands really started just releasing albums, what, once every 5 years if you're lucky.
Well, that's
So,
because a lot of them actually lost their record deals or
well,
folded
that's true.
or
That's
went on
true.
hiatus,
Many reasons. Fights, breakups. Yeah.
but think about it though. Look at all the hiatuses these bands went on because of the grunge scene just killed them and no record labels would touch them,
Oh, I know.
you know?
I know.
And even if you had a deal in place, they let you get right out of the deal because they didn't want that music. The record company did not want that music, so they would just rescind the record deal or buy them out or whatever, and then that way they didn't have to come up with any new albums. There was a few that made it through, like Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, to name a few. But for the
Yeah.
most part, even Kiss was basically done and on hiatus for a
Well,
while.
again, in the bands you just mentioned, they were staying popular and relevant, so the labels are pushing them to continuously release music. I mean, labels still had a presence back then, even though it was sort of starting to dwindle. But I mean, yeah, exactly. That's the only bands that were really releasing albums every couple years are the ones that were still selling out sheds. You know what I mean?
You know. All right, so yep, so that's what I got at number six. Still not black enough.
All right. So number five to me is, for me rather, is Wasp's second record, and that is The Last Command. I know, look at your face. I know, I was waiting to see your reaction. Funny thing is, I think when I was playlisting these songs to see how many of each album to sort of help me with this ranking, this has like close to my number one. But material wise, I think the Last Command is just right there at number five, and not any higher, but it is in the top five, so you can't look at me too crazy. But Blind in Texas, Wild Child, obviously being the two most famous, popular songs that hit the charts. But then, you got Widowmaker and Cries in the Night is great, and Running Wild in the Streets and Sex Drive to me are very underrated songs. Really like them. Also, Savage, which was a bonus track on the re-release, I think is just classic Wasp and should be included in their catalog. So definitely, I wish that was on the actual record. But great, yeah, great album with some great songs, but the songs aren't as good as the ones I love higher up. So number five to me is second record, Last Command.
All right, my number five is gonna go back to 1989, the last album of the 80s for Wasp, none other than the Headless Children.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite Wasp albums for sure. Forever Free I mentioned already once before. The Real Me, I know he's a big Who fan. They did a good job on that song. Another great song that you failed to mention when you mentioned Headless Children was Mean Man, which is
Oh
actually
yeah,
the theme song for Chris Holmes. He calls himself the Mean Man.
yeah.
And great song, definitely a great song. The Neutron Bomber, another overlooked track. I feel a lot of times that to me was really good to hear that one again. You know, uh, yeah, overall, it has about 5 to 6 decent songs on here that I really appreciate and like. Um, I don't know. I'm not, there's some bands where you just like almost the whole album, every single track, but then there's always some albums where you only like a handful of tracks on. And I don't know, Wasp is just one of these bands, that oddly enough, I like them. I really like Wasp a lot, but I just never really got into like every single song on an album really, except for the first couple albums. And there's,
I feel that completely. Like they fall in probably my top 20 favorite bands maybe, but there's not one album that is 100% from start to finish, really, besides if we get when we get to number one and two, it's there. But I totally understand what you're saying there. It's a really good way to put it.
yeah. Well, that's where I got number five for me is the Headless Children. We got four albums each left. Let's see
Yeah,
how this
we've
how
been
these
burning through these.
yeah.
This is a fast one for how many albums are. So my number four is going to be 2002's "Dying for the World." Really didn't expect this album to be as good as it was, and honestly, I didn't realize how good it was until I started re-listening to the records here because I only really checked it out once or twice when the album came out. Um, so really, really enjoy it. Think there's I mean, obviously, it harkens back to old school Wasp for me, which is why it's so high. But the one-two punch of Shadow Man and My Wicked Heart to start the record are is probably the best one-two punch on a Wasp record for me personally. But Rubber Man is great. Trail of Tears, Blackbone Torso is a little silly, but I really enjoy the song. And Hallowed Ground, obviously, which is heavily dedicated to those who perished in September 11th. So, yeah, I really dig the record. Um, old school Watts feel, Daryl Roberts playing guitar, really nice dude. Him and Mike Duda really treated me well when I worked for them that day, and Frankie Banelli on drums as well. So, yeah, definitely an album a lot of people probably haven't heard, who aren't like big Wasp guys, but definitely an album you guys should check out if you haven't. Dying for the World. That is my number four.
All right. My number four takes us back to recent, the most recent Wasp release, Golgotha.
Mhm.
And yeah, definitely wow, what an album. And I didn't have this one. Um
Oh,
I don't know, it came out around 2015.
yeah.
I will say this, it's the best sounding sonically sounding the best Wasp album money can buy. Just amazing how great that crystal clearness is of this album. The best sounding Wasp album by a mile. Probably didn't hurt the ranking any, that's for sure. But when you dig into the songs, it's like, wow, Blackie's back. Blackie's back. Kicks it off with Scream, Last Runaway, Shotgun, Miss You. Oh, Miss You. What a freaking great
Yeah,
song.
Miss You's a great song. He plays it from time to time. Miss You's a really good song.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a great way to kick things off on an album. Those four songs are a great start to this album. And kind of tails off a little bit after that, but after an opening like that, just what can you say? I mean, that's just won me over from the first time I started listening to it, and it's like, where has this album been my whole life? Because I never owned it, so I had to like hear it, other avenues. But man, oh man, definitely, and probably one of the best Wasp album covers, by the way, too. Just
Yeah,
just to give you guys a heads up, one of the weirdest titles, mind you, but great
hard to
album
say.
cover,
Yeah, hard
and
to say. Yeah.
but great album cover, definitely. So yeah, Golgotha, we got it number four, and
Yep.
that's definitely a well-deserved spot from my estimation, because I never would have thought this album would have cracked the top 10 to tell you the truth. And here we are at number four. All right.
Yeah, that's a lot higher for you than I thought too. So this one's gonna shock you, but my number three is 1984's debut
What?
self-titled W.A.S.P.
What? Are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
smoking crack?
No, but I always I love the record. So glad they're playing it live. I love the album. Um, but for me,
Number three?
the for me
Are you sure
the
you're reading
two
that right? Are you reading
yes,
that right?
no,
Okay. I'm
no,
just double
no.
checking.
I
All right.
absolutely am. Obviously, I love the record. I just feel the other two albums that I'm going to mention after this, um, are better for me. And again, like I mentioned in the Kiss, the Alice Cooper, the Poison stuff we did, a lot of this is about when I discovered it because songs I love play a huge part of my life, and every time I hear them, it's a story. So the first song I ever heard was on VH1, I Want to Be Somebody. Probably the best Wasp song of all time. But again, the next two records have more, a conglomerate of songs I love more than the amount I love on the first record. Now, here's my problem with the first record. And it depends on how you look at it, because Blackie apparently doesn't even think Animal or what's the other song that I love? I can't think of it off the top of my head, but Show No Mercy, which is the B-side to Animal. Those two songs should be on that record, or the two best. They would be my two favorite songs on the record. But yeah, I mean, Hellion, Sleeping in the Fire, On Your Knees, Love Machine is, probably my favorite Wasp song. Um, but beyond that, I mean, it gets a little bit boring. Tormentor, The Torture Never Stops. I love those songs, but they get a little boring to me compared to the rest. So that's why Wasp is astoundingly my number three on the list. So yeah, you're that shocked, huh?
Yeah, I am shocked. I never would expected that not to be number one.
Mm,
Most people's albums, it's always number one on
mm.
every ranking I've
Right.
ever seen. You're the first person not to have it. I am really shocked considering you're a
Yeah,
Wasp fan.
yeah, no, it's
Wow, I
definitely
can't
number
picture
three.
anything above it. There's nothing better in my book. But anyhow, let's get to my number three so I can talk about
Yeah,
one and tell
yeah,
you how great it really is. Okay.
I got you.
But this one it was high on your list too, so I was surprised. This album definitely an underrated gem of the catalog. Dying for the World, Number
Yeah,
three. Wow, what amazing, great album. And I just recently picked this one up about a few months back. Boy, was I surprised to find out that I liked every single song on it except maybe two upon first couple listens. It's like, wow, where was this album my whole life,
right.
considering it's been out for 22 years.
Yeah,
But Shadow Man, My Wicked Heart, great way to start it off, but then it loses a little with that black bone torso, like you mentioned.
yeah,
Hallowed Ground, great. Trail of Tears, Stone Cold Killer, just a great album overall.
right.
Uh, really, really enjoyed this one. It definitely stands out for me. Um, compared to a lot of these other albums. Yeah, and it's weird because you at this point he was only coming out with albums like once every few years. Yet he made this one in like right, Unholy Terror came out in '01, and then here's this one right on its heels that came out in June of 2002. So we
Right.
actually got at that point at least we actually got two W.A.S.P albums back to back years. Uh, so yeah, that was definitely it was all written and recorded in less than a year, really. So he didn't even just amazing how it came out that quickly there. And Frankie Banali on drums on this one, Daryl Roberts on guitar, Mike Duda on bass. So yeah, just these guys did a great job on this album. You gotta remember Frankie's at this point, Frankie never was actually considered a member of W.A.S.P, but he played on a lot of the albums and did a few tours with them. Um, but he never was really like a true member of W.A.S.P because he always was had Quiet Riot going and stuff.
Right.
And amazing because I remember this was around the time that Quiet Riot got back together with the Mental Health lineup. So he recorded this album, and I believe he did some work on a few tracks on Unholy Terror. So he worked helped Blackie out when he could, when he around his Quiet Riot schedule.
Right.
And you could definitely see on this album, you can hear that Benally drum beat, man. I mean, I out of all the drummers I've ever seen live, I will say this. I don't know if you ever got to see him live much.
Oh yeah, yeah,
This
twice.
guy can beat the hell out of a drum kit, Frankie Benally. No
Yeah.
doubt about it, man. He can beat the hell out of a kit. And there was nothing like watching him play live, man. And people might not consider him like the most greatly technical, greatest drummer of all time. He never gets any really love on these best drummer
Well, I'll tell you
polls.
this.
But
He absolutely I said twice, but that's wrong. I seen Quiet Riot with Benally probably 5 or 6 times. And I just seen Quiet Riot this past summer for free in Niagara Falls without him, and it's you can definitely tell the difference. Yeah, he was a very specific drummer, and immediately you could tell it's Benally, even on these Wasp records. Like you can tell, like, oh, that's Frankie. He just had a specific way of hitting and playing his beats that you can tell it's him. So yeah, he's much missed in that category for sure.
yeah, no doubt. All right, so that is my number three, Dying for the World.
All right.
And let's get into these top two. I can't wait to see what albums you feel are better than the debut. I'm almost
Well, number two for me, and this is probably going to shock you, features one of two brothers that are my favorite guitar duo. Is Bob Kulick playing on this record and the Frankie Banali that we just spoke about. And it's 1992's Crimson Idol. Um, love this record from front to back. Arena of Pleasure is a great song, and I don't know if you know this, but Doug Eldridge played on it, but wasn't credited for it. Um, great riff. And then Chainsaw Charlie is probably my number one favorite Wasp song. I just love that song for some reason. Glad I got to see it live a few times. The Idol is one of the best ballads in the world. You mentioned Hold On to My Heart, which is a great underrated song. Yeah, The Invisible Boy is a good song. So yeah, just I love the riffs. I love the record. I love Bob's playing. I love the the whole concept thing is pretty cool, as far as like the record label and industries and how they controlled the world through religion and all this shit. So, yeah, I absolutely Crimson Idol number two for me. I think it's an underrated gem for being, uh, at the beginning of what people consider the downslide of W.A.S.P for a long time, but I think it's one of their most solid albums. So number two for me, Crimson Idol, which Blackie plays to death, by the way. I'm glad he's finally giving this record a break, though, I will say that. Because the last 10 years of Blackie's career, maybe 15, has been him pimping out this record. So I am glad he's giving it a break because it is getting a little old.
All right, and that's going to take me to my number two, and that's no surprise what mine is going to be, none other than 1985's The Last Command.
Wow. Yeah.
Great album, great album. It's odd because this is the only album that W.A.S.P pretty much used like an outside producer for, and that's Spencer Proffer, who
Yep.
was best for known for tuning the dials during Quiet Riot's Metal Health, which is none other than, the first heavy metal album to ever hit number one on the charts. 6 times platinum selling Metal Health, by the way. And yeah, just a great album, The Last Command. I think this is another one of those ones where it never really, I mean, this album did good. On the charts, it peaked at number 49, and it did go gold. But sadly enough, I was shocked that it didn't go platinum, to tell you the truth, because it definitely was one of these albums that you would hear a lot of songs from, and Blackie over the years played a lot of songs live off this album. But
Yeah.
let's start talking about the way the album kicks off in fine style with none other than Wild Child, which is one of the great songs, and it was co-written with Lawless and Chris Holmes, one of the few co-writes, that Chris Holmes has, believe it or not. Um, and they also co-wrote Ball Crusher together, which it go, from Wild Child to Ball Crusher. What a great way to kick off the album.
Yeah.
Fistful of Diamonds, a great sing-along. Widowmaker, another great epic song. Of course, Blind in Texas was always one that a lot of people enjoyed, and Cries in the Night, kind of an underrated song there. Running Wild in the Streets kind of sounds like a Quiet Riot song in a
Yeah.
way, because
Yeah.
it sounds like it fits right on the back of Condition Critical, and it probably should because Spencer Proffer co-wrote it with Blackie Lawless, so
Yeah.
um, no surprise there. And The Last Command is heard around the land, none other than The Last Command, another great song, the title track. So yeah, I just enjoy the heck out of this album. Always have. It wasn't the greatest produced album, mind you. I don't feel it was as good as the first album production wise. I feel it's a little flat. It's missing a little something, even though it has some really good hard edge songs to kick off the album. But you know, still a great album from its time, and one that I still look back on fondly to this day. My number two, The Last Command.
There you go. All right. Well, then we're down to number one, and my number one was one that was sort of lower on your list than I thought it would be, and that's 1986's Inside the Electric Circus. Like I said when we started the show, I picked this up at a Goodwill, and just like wow, again, you know how I was with 80s stuff, and I really like the more poppier stuff from that era. I feel it has character, it brings a character to the metal aspect of it. So Inside of the Electric Circus for me fits right up there with like Trash and Hey Stupid and Hot in the Shade from Kiss and Revenge and records like that. So um, really enjoy it. Starting off with a big welcome is an awesome way to start a show, start a record, and then right into Inside the Electric Circus, which is just classic W.A.S.P. Glad they're playing it on this tour. Glad they're still keeping it in rotation. I know it's one of Blackie's favorites. Um, you mentioned this, and I'm shocked by this, but Sweet Cheetah was the song that really grabbed me when I first listened to the record when I was a kid. So Sweet Cheetah's up in my top two or three favorite W.A.S.P songs. So for you to mention that out of all of them is really funny because we normally don't click on on B-sides like that. You either love it or hate it, and I'm usually the opposite. So, very interesting that Sweet Cheetah was there. But another one that you didn't mention that is right up there with Sweet Cheetah is I'm Alive. I don't know what you feel about that song, but that song screams Wasp and metal to me. So those two are the highest ones on the record for me is Sweet Cheetah and I'm Alive. But great album. Hopefully Blackie considers playing this thing all the way through. And yeah, that's my number one inside the Electric Circus. Now, please tell me why the first album is better.
Well, there's no doubt about it. Number one for me, the debut. It's the first album I ever heard by him, and it's just a great album from top to bottom. And to me, there's not a throwaway track on here. The only sad part of it is that the two songs you mentioned aren't on the album, and I know Animal was supposed to be, but the record company just couldn't allow it, and there was a lot of grief about that, which is kind of one of the weird reasons why I'm surprised he's not playing it on this tour.
Well,
Doesn't make
I'm
any
not. He said it
sense.
was, well, no, he's always said it was a religious thing. He's doing it because he doesn't because it's same reason why Cooper won't play Spark in the Dark and a couple like Dirty Dreams and stuff because it's a religious thing. And he made that very clear, and that's why he actually said in one of the meet and greets videos from the last tour that he talked to someone and they said, "Well, you're a character, it's a story, it's okay to play." So I think when he started playing it on that tour, something hit him and he was like, I'm not doing it next time. That's what I'm thinking.
I don't know because it's just weird because that song was supposed to be on this album, and considering you're doing the whole album, it would kind of. I mean, I know when some bands do full albums, if there's B-sides or tracks that were associated with that main album when they do it, like
Yeah.
Marillion, for example, they come out, they do their full album sets during their weekend shows when they have those Marillion weekends.
Yeah.
They would come out and all the B-sides from that album would get played after the album, of course.
That's cool though.
They would
Yeah.
still do the album from top to bottom, but then any songs associated with that album or other songs that were released around that time, they would come out and just add them on at the end and play them, which I thought he would do that, but obviously you don't want it to take away from other songs like Wild Child and other stuff possibly. So yeah, that could be another thing was the time, the time restraints there that he might have faced too. Wants to still give people the goods on top of this album, but hey, you play the album for me, I'd be happy walking right out. You go from kicking it off in style with I Want to Be Somebody, Love Machine, The Flame. What a great song. That's one of those underrated tracks that you don't really hear too often. Hellion, another phenomenal great song. And of course, the ballad "Sleeping in the Fire." That song always got to me. I just love that song. "On Your Knees," "Tormentor," "The Torture Never Stops." Not a bad cut anywhere on this album. That's the real reason why it's number one. I mean, it can't be topped. "B.A.D." Bad, probably the weakest song on the album, but it's still decent.
Yeah,
And then,
see, I actually consider that one of the best on the record. I love B.A.B. Yeah, yeah.
but to each their own. We'll have to do a best and worst track episode down the road, but
Sure.
makes it that was our hard to do because you can't mention other songs. You can only mention the best. You can only mention
Yeah,
your worst or the least favorite, however
right.
you want to word it. So, but yeah, just a great album. They always say you have your whole life to write your first ever record, but you only have like a year or 6 months to write your next. Bon Jovi always was quoted as saying that,
Right.
and just you know. They hit it out of the park on this one, no doubt. Best album they've ever been associated with. Only peaking at number 74, but it was their other gold album. So they have two golds. They have W.A.S.P and The Last Command. Only four of their albums charted, and your favorite there, Inside the Electric Circus, hit number 60.
Yeah.
And the best charting album of W.A.S.P's career was The Headless Children at number 48.
Mm.
So
That makes
they
sense.
weren't a big chart band, but these guys are more known for their live show.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You know what I mean? So, bands make it big based
They were
upon.
they were probably the one band out of the glam and hair era that was considered shock rock. Like not even Twisted Sister is shock like Wasp was. Wasp was the Alice Cooper brand. You know what I mean? In my opinion, like Wasp had that shock thing. So I think that's why they're separated from the pack a little bit.
Well, don't forget what they used to do on stage, you
Oh,
know.
that's what I'm. No, no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
That's exactly what I'm saying.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't just the makeup and stuff. It was the blood and the stuff with the girls and all that stuff. Oh yeah, the raw meat.
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah,
And when he not originally last year when he did that tour 2 years ago, it was supposed to be the reenactment of that whole tour
I know. Well,
initially
so
when
was
it was
this one.
announced,
Yeah,
and none of that's happening, you know.
I know. I know. Yeah,
So I
it's
don't know
true.
why they ended up announcing it all like the way they did, thinking that.
Blackie's sort of like Gene. He's got a lot of big ideas, but not all of them come true. So, and he talks about them all, which
Yeah.
is a problem.
All right. Well, that's gonna put a wrap on this episode.
Yeah,
Great episode here, digging into the Wasp catalog. And I would say stay tuned. Probably in a couple of weeks, we're going to have our top 10 Wasp tunes. Might as well do them while this albums are fresh in our heads. So we're
yeah,
going to tease it a little bit for you. I would say expect it before the end of the month.
cool.
And
Love it.
that puts a wrap on this episode, folks. And if Wasp is still coming in your neck of the woods, we highly recommend catching the show. You
Yeah,
won't be disappointed.
yep.
Signing off.